satellites?
A satellite represents a journey, information gathering, this journey around the Earth. All right, so I'm Sean.
I'm Milo.
And this is Satellite Haiku.
Nice. All right. Do we start with check-ins?
Yeah. What's on your mind?
Let's see. I just kind of I'm working on shooting a music video, so I'm really excited. And I went to see the woman that's in it last night, and she was playing with a banjo player, and it was just a really inspiring, sweet concert. It was outside.
Nice.
At our mezcal bar that's right up the street. So really, really sweet, and I appreciated it. So
yeah, you're an empty nester, so you can just do stuff like that.
Right, and Huli was down with her sore neck, so it was.
Yeah. Did you hear the Onion bot Infowars?
Yeah, I don't really understand what that's going to mean. Like, can you?
I don't necessarily know either. They say they're going to turn it into a satirical site like The Onion or whatever. I don't know why you would need a separate one, but I think it's just the sort of the symbolism of it that is beautiful. You know, it's like the one good thing that has happened so far in the last 2 weeks.
Right. And who owns The Onion now? Is it like a conglomerate? Is it some guy, some billionaire dude?
I don't know, actually. That's a good question. I don't think it's like a billionaire dude, but I think it's, yeah, I don't know. I think it was sold a few years ago. I think it was like it changed hands. I don't remember. I know the head writer, the guy who was like the head creative person left a few years ago, and it went into new hands. But I think either way, I think it's kind of beautiful that it was just the symbolism of it that I enjoyed.
Yeah, totally.
I mean, I haven't really been following the news that much, so I've been picking up these little tidbits here and there. Yeah. How do you I was thinking about news. Like, how do you follow news? Like, what's your way of following news?
My main thing, which I don't like it, but I just keep doing it. And that is I pay the New York Times. And then I feel like the fact that I don't always agree with them, or that I think that they are biased in some ways. Like if you look at data on how much the New York Times covered Hillary's emails versus Trump's, Billy Bush Sunday thing, it's kind of ridiculous. Like it almost seemed like they were like 80-1 or something. Like it was
right. The political news they do is really problematic, but they do so much other great stuff, world news and, kind of the longer pieces and all that.
Yeah. And they, for a while there, I was reading it in Spanish. They had a Latino version that would cover South America, which was interesting. Like they had some people in Bogota and Mexico City. They just discontinued that. And I think the reason they started it was one of those, like Carlos Slim or something bought the New York Times, or like put in, 80% of the investment. So he wanted to like maybe expand it to be like the New World Times, like South America, Central America, and it didn't really go that way. So I guess he might have sold it. I forget. But yeah, so your question was, well, how to consume the news? I don't have access to television news. Like my parents sit down and watch like the 5 o'clock news, 6 o'clock news. I hate to use this term, and maybe it sounds entitled, but like I'm bored. Like I'm bored of the MAGA shtick. Like if it's a show, I'm done with that show. Like I don't really want to watch the season 2.
It's been 10 years. It's been on for 10 years.
It's not, and it
feels like 100 years.
And yeah, like there's that joke that satirical writers were complaining that if they had written this 20 years ago, you would have said, no, we can't shoot this and air this because it's just too ridiculous. Like Rudy Giuliani, like, what was it?
4 seasons.
Yeah, like that. Like if you wrote that as like a TV writer, they'd be like, "Come on, Sean, bring something back that's like more realistic."
Yeah, I mean, it was Parks and Rec level of.
Yeah. Totally. Like even worse in a way, because like the little black thing sliding down his face, like Sidney Powell. Like imagine.
These characters were outrageous. Yeah.
Yeah.
And they still are. I mean, you have Matt Gaetz, and I mean, it's it's wild. But yeah, I've never, like, I don't know, I don't watch, I guess I pick up news, like my sort of antenna is up, and I'm on, Substack notes, and I'm on, I'm on TikTok, and I'm on things sometimes. I do some scrolling. I don't do a ton of that either. I recently kind of imposed some limits on, like screen time on my phone, so that I'm not just scrolling all the time, because it does get addictive. But so I guess I just sort of pick up stuff that way, and you see clips of the news, or clips of John Oliver, or clips of things, and then headlines that I scroll past. So I kind of just, I don't follow. I'm not a deep follower of news. What I end up doing is I sort of get a sense of what is being talked about, and kind of what the different sort of perspectives are on what's being talked about. Because you'll see a thing, and you'll see, people on the left that kind of have their reaction to a thing, and people on the right have their reaction to those people having their reaction, right? And so I guess I sort of feel like I get a vibe, I don't know, for lack of a better word. I sort of get a sense of what's going on, and then I kind of make decisions about what I'm interested in learning about. So I'll see, like, in an immigration debate, mass deportations or something, right? And I will very much pick up that that's a big issue that is on a lot of people's minds, and it's a big issue in the election, and what people are, what is deciding the election for people. And, so it's something, that I care about. And so at that point, then I want to start learning, like, what is actually likely to happen, if Trump gets elected, or if Kamala gets elected, and what are the different policies, and what actually is happening at the border, and how many people have crossed, and how many people have crossed through ports of entry versus just kind of crossing illegally, and all these things. So I end up kind of just I latch onto an issue like that, and then I kind of dive in, and I want to figure out, like, what is the actual deal with this, and then I'll move on to a different one, because I found that there's not much utility in knowing what's going on across the whole spectrum of news. Like, there's so much you can't do anything about. But if I feel like I want to offer my own point of view about something, like on my armchair pundit, newsletter, or if I want to just have a deeper conversation with somebody about it, I want to be informed. So I kind of choose the things that I want to, if I want to weigh in on something, then I want to know about it, right? And if I don't plan to, take any action, donate or write about something, or sort of advocate for something, if I don't plan to actually do anything, then there's almost no point in knowing anything about that issue. You know what I mean? It's just darkness. So, like, what's happening in Gaza is horrifying, right? But there's a limit to what I'm able to do about it. And so then I wonder, like, how much should I absorb of what's happening in Gaza, right? Like, I think it's sort of immoral to look away entirely. It feels like, but it also feels like, maybe masochistic to really delve into that when I can't do anything about it, or if I'm not, beyond the level to which I'm able to do stuff, to do something, to take some action. So I don't know.
No, I know. I feel you there. I feel the same. I remember I had a professor at NYU who was the head of the communications department, and he had written a book called "Amusing Ourselves to Death."
Yeah, Neil Postman. Yeah,
Neil Postman, right? And he was really. First of all, he used to he dragged his desk out of his office into, like, the main area where all the cubicles were. And he would sit with his feet up on the desk, and above his head was a giant, like, 6 by 9 foot poster of the New York Clean Indoor Air Act. And then he would smoke a cigar and kind of cackle as people walked by. Like, he'd make little comments.
Yeah.
Anyway, that was his thing. But his thing was, he was a big proponent of kind of ranking communications technologies, and, like, sort of like the pros and cons of each as you moved along. And he started with, at least in this book, he starts kind of right away with the printing press, like with Gutenberg's printing press. And he said, like, oh, massive shift in the transfer of knowledge across geographical boundaries and across class. Like it used to be only the rich nobles could afford a scribe to copy a book. So a book was extremely valuable proprietary, kind of like a prototype.
Mm-hmm.
And once it became ubiquitous, knowledge and the sort of the age of enlightenment was born because you could easily move. If you had an innovation or an insight in Spain, it could move to France across the Pyrenees with much more ease. So then he goes through and he looks at like radio and then television. And at the time, this was the 90s. And his thing was that knowing about a serial killer in Austin, you read about it and you go, the world is a dangerous, scary place. And there's a serial killer on the loose in Austin and he's doing terrible things, right? But the impact on your life is zero. It will be zero. And yet you release cortisol and like adrenaline and you worry and you kind of like your vibration becomes more nervous. And he said, if you look at that happening and scaling that, that's exactly what you're talking about. Like you and I, we won't visit Gaza. We won't visit Palestine. We won't necessarily visit Israel in our lifetimes. I probably won't. And for several thousand years, there's been conflict in that region that's horrific,
right?
Biblical kind of
And
thing.
also we can advocate for policy with the amount that we already know about it, right? Like we already have sort of taken a side, so to speak, or, we already have sort of or at least, I have pretty strong opinions about, that we should stop selling arms to Israel, that we should be aggressively kind of pushing for a ceasefire, those kinds of things, right? Like you can advocate for those things without kind of immersing yourself in the constant horror of it.
Right. And there's kind of this agreement, a policy agreement since the end of World War II, that we're the policemen of the world and we try to end conflicts, not support them, and I know you could, I know things could get weird when you say, what about Ukraine? Like you're giving weapons to Ukraine and you're giving them to Israel. And I don't know, I guess the idea is that like, there's this unspoken or maybe highly written policy that we don't, we don't victimize people we're not the bully. We're not supposed to be the bully as America. Mm-hmm. And as taxpayers, we're responsible for calling out our leaders when they don't abide by those policies that we've kind of agreed to. And I think that's what's happening here. And what's so awkward is I remember early on, Anthony Blinken saying something like, well, we told Israel how we felt about not using such and such type of bombs, but there's nothing we can do. They can do whatever they want. And I was like, you could stop giving them money. Like
stop actually giving them the bombs.
Yeah, and we did that. Biden did
certain arms,
large bombs. But at the same time, like there is this sense with both of those conflicts that we're in this like neighborhood where our neighbor is, victimizing another person, and it's like a domestic violence thing where we're just watching it happen, and that feel a little bit helpless. Mm-hmm. And that I think is the root source of, at least of my confusion and pain around the issue. I feel helpless. Do you feel helpless?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, that's what I was kind of speaking to. I mean, that's why I don't kind of immerse myself in the news, because there's this sort of the combination of feeling helpless and feeling totally broken by it. Like, what's the point of that, right? So, if I can't do anything about it, or if I'm choosing, if I already know what I can do about it and I'm doing those things, then, I sort of allow myself to cut off the supply of that news, so to speak. I dip in, but I won't immerse myself. And, again, like my sort of rule is, if I want to weigh in on something, if I want to have a strong opinion about it, if I want to be able to really kind of engage in the discourse about something, then I dive in and I learn about it. But other than that, no, I don't. But you were saying something, actually, this is kind of a good segue, because you were talking about just the ability, or the sort of the inability to not follow news from, you hear about that serial killer on the other side of the country or whatever, and it raises your kind of cortisol levels and you respond to it. I was just thinking that I often think about the difference between parenting when we were kids, like, and how we were parented in Gen X era versus now, and how over sort of the helicopter parenting that goes on now, and that kids stay indoors all the time. And, you know, we were just outside all the time, and we were free range kids, right? And it's super weird to me that the generation of free range kids has grown up to be this generation of very overprotective, kind of hovering parents whose kids don't go outside. And I wonder kind of what happened to our generation. Like, how did we, because you hear people talk in our generation about how much they sort of like appreciated that free range time and the freedom that we had as kids. And yet those same people turn around and they don't raise their kids that way, you know, at our age. And for the most part. And I think it might have to do with that constant deluge of, you know, scary news that we were, maybe we were subjected to. And so there's this sort of sense that the world is dangerous, and there are, you know, people are going to abduct our children and blah, blah, blah. And I think, I mean, there's other things that have changed too. I think a lot more, there's a lot more two-parent working, you know, both parents working, a lot more households where both parents work and there's nobody home all day. And so when we were kids, like, you could kind of go, a lot of houses had at least one parent home, right? And so you could kind of, if you needed to, you could just go to somebody's house in your network of friends. That's definitely changed. So there are other things that have changed, but I think that one thing we wanted to chat about was just how we became friends, and kind of we've been friends since that time. Since we were those free range kids, we've been friends. Because I met you when you were in first grade. I think we were in first grade. Yes. And we didn't become friends then because we didn't spend a lot of time together. It was sort of like this gap between then and.
Did we go to different kindergartens? I was in Mrs. Red Miles.
Yeah, I was in Miss Gretchen.
Yeah. So Jeremy was in Miss Gretchen's. Yeah. So there were two kindergartens, and I was in the other one. And then first grade we had Mrs.
Johns.
What's her name?
Johns. Mrs.
You had Johns in first grade?
Yeah.
No, I had the woman that had the wig, Mrs. Cranch.
Oh, yeah.
So we were in different first grades. I didn't realize there were two first grades.
Yeah, so we knew each other at that time, but we didn't hang out. But then you went to a different school, and then you came back to the school that I was going to in high school.
Right.
I went to when we really became friends.
I moved to a public school that was in the surrounding township around our little town in second grade. And I remember on the first day of school, I don't know if you remember this, I had a South African accent. My mom had grown up in South Africa. And I remember the first day, and I can't even do accents these days, but I remember saying, like, where could I find a drink of water? And this kid, and this was like North Philadelphia, so the kid was like, what do you mean water? It's wooder. And I remember like that sort of, you know, that like switch going off, like, don't sound different, don't be different, like try to be the same. And I came home and my mom was like, what happened to your accent? And I was like, oh, I don't want to stand out. Like I'm new, you know, kind of new kid. I do remember when I was a kid, I just sort of ran everywhere. Like I was hyperactive, and I just ran, kind of like a sort of Forrest Gumpy kid, right? And so I got there, and I was really fast at running for my age. And they used to play this game. It's basically had one Nerf football, and whoever had the football, everyone else was trying to tackle that kid. And they had to run around, and if they got scared of being tackled, they could throw it to someone else, right? So I remember I come out on the field, and they're like, they explained how to play the game, and then they threw the ball to me, and I just started running around, like, and then like the group followed me, and then after a while, people started peeling off and just walking back.
They were bored because they couldn't catch you.
There were three of us, and I was like, "What? Why aren't they playing?" And they're like, "It's no fun because we can't catch you."
But my move in that game, because I wasn't that fast, was when I could tell that I was, you know, about to be tackled, or if people were converging on me from other directions, the closest person to me, I would just toss the ball to that person, and then I would lower my shoulder and just tackle them. So I would just basically hand off the ball so that I could immediately tackle that person.
That's super mean, man.
I know it was mean, but I wasn't fast, so I had to come up with something.
What was that story? You told me about that story where I think it was Lane. One of the bullies would grab people by the hands and swing them around and then sort of let them go and they would tumble. And then I remember there was this, like you kind of taught us all how to stand up to that bully. Can you tell that story?
Oh yeah. Well, so that was I don't know if that was his normal move, but one time he would just torment us. And one time he came onto the playground and he was just taking down my friends, or just he was two grades ahead, I think. And so he was a bigger kid. And so, yeah, he would just he was doing this thing where he would grab each one of us and he would spin each kid around and like throw them down to the ground. And it was like this sort of gravelly ground. Like it wasn't, a place you wanted to kind of get thrown onto the ground. And so he got to me eventually. And I was like the fourth or fifth kid that he was doing this to. And so I just, as I was spinning around, I just did this thing where I like jumped up in the air and I planted my feet so hard. And then he just didn't expect it. So he lost his balance and he fell down. And it was like this mini triumph for sure. Yeah. Yeah. But I think those, like you say, when one person stands up to the bully, it kind of, I think it did. I got a good reaction from
like it reveals the chink in their armor in a way. Like it shows the rest of the people, hey, he isn't infallible. He isn't like all dominant,
Yeah.
Yeah, that was true. So yeah, so basically I came back. I had friends in the little parochial school where we in the town in Bernathen.
Mm-hmm.
And I had more friends there than I did at the public school. I just wasn't, I don't know, culturally really clicking over there. And so I wanted to go back as a junior and my mom let me transfer back. And so I came back as a junior. And the one weird thing about that was that we had those Greek clubs.
Yeah, it was like fraternities, but the high school version. It was super weird. Yeah,
you were supposed to.
I thought high schools had that, but as I grew up, it was like, no, we were a weird high school that had fraternities and sororities.
It's true. And what was awkward for me was that you guys had all what's it called? Where you apply for
pledge.
You had pledged
as
sophomores, and so I was a junior, and so I was pledging with the sophomores, and I was older. I was basically being hazed by my own classmates and the seniors, so it was. And
it was kind of required, like you couldn't not be in their fraternity, kind of, right? I mean, the way it worked was there was a fraternity for townies. You and I were townies. And then there was a fraternity for the boarding students, like a different one. And same with the sororities. There was one for the ones in town and one for the girls who lived in the dorms. And so, yeah, you kind of, if you were a townie, like you were supposed to be in that fraternity, and there was not like an option to not be in it.
Right. No, you were just like the dance, the school dance, the junior senior dance. I remember I just said, I'm not going to go to the dance. I'm not going to do it. Mm-hmm. And then someone was like, you have to. And I was like, you have to take someone. And if you don't, they'll assign you something.
They assigned me a date. Yeah.
We both were assigned dates. Yeah.
Oh, that's right.
Laura something was my date. And
I can't remember my date's name, but I still feel guilty about it sometimes because I did not give her a nice time at all because I didn't want to be there. And, I think once we arrived at the dance, we just kind of went our separate ways. Like, oh, okay, we're here. And other people took their dates out to dinner before the dance and stuff. I didn't do any of that. Like and I still sometimes feel bad about it.
And I remember, I think it was my Aunt Siri that was our sort of like our class's advisor or something. Because I remember being brought into the office and told, like, you do have to go to the dance. It's a required, and you have to, and since you didn't pick a date, we're assigning you this person from, so that was pretty wild. And then, so I remember the first day of junior year, I was new at the school, right? And we had met before, like I think we had.
Yeah, but not, it had been a while.
It'd been a while. And we went to, I think it was typing class with Miss Pearl.
Mhm.
And I remember it was
Like
sort
the
of
buzz cut. She had like the buzz cut, like a flat top, and I think I heard that she had been an actual drill sergeant in the Marines.
I think that's true, yeah. And it was north of the Arch. Like, remember how we had that Descharmes building, Descharmes Hall, and then you had to could have go through a breezeway and then up some stairs, and it was like in the next building over Pendleton Hall. I don't know. Anyway, I remember sitting down, and I remember you were to my left, and then it was kind of like, that's it. Like, we just started talking, and then we went out after class out onto the campus and started talking, and just never, the conversation's still going. Look at that.
Still going, yeah. I mean, we've had a few phases. So we were roommates in New York.
Yeah, that's right.
We used to write songs together. I was just thinking about that yesterday. I was thinking about, because I knew we might talk about this today. So, and I started singing Shuffling Feet in the shower. Yeah. I can just remember the chorus. I don't remember any.
You have it? I was listening to it the other day. I have both of those songs that we recorded together.
I have a cassette somewhere, but I have no idea.
No, I can send you the MP3. I have it on my phone.
Oh, sweet. Yeah. Love it.
I have that one, and then Jesus Along the Fence.
Oh, yeah.
Remember that? That was really fun.
So we used to do that.
We wanted to be the Indigo Guys.
Or people called us that. I don't know if I wanted to be that.
Well, they were really popular.
They were. The Indigo Girls were very popular, but I don't think I was a super big fan of being called the Indigo Guys at the time.
Right. I mean, what we wanted to, like, Simon and Garfunkel had already been, so like the duo of guys. There was that established.
There was precedent for it. Yeah.
It wasn't who was the guy? It wasn't Bread, kind of like that, like the band.
Yeah. Well, my cousin, one of my favorite cousins, her husband, when he was in high school, had he was part of a singing duo. And that was definitely in the era, deep in the Simon and Garfunkel era, and they would do Simon and Garfunkel songs. And I remember them performing. They would perform a lot, like at school functions. But my dad had a big 40th birthday, and they performed at our house. And like they were the thing. Anyway,
so we were recorded. I remember when you would come to visit New York, and we would sing in the stairwell.
Yeah,
that was cool. And
good acoustics, yeah.
Awesome acoustics. And then, and what you were saying? It was a good segue. Or were we going to talk about AI and art?
Yeah. I think the question. So we started to kind of get to it last time, like how we are interacting with AI today, and kind of generative AI in particular. There's other categories, but yeah. I mean, so the question is, that we were sort of circling around was, is AI like a tool, or is it some kind of huge disruption? Is it a tool that artists will use to create art, or is it something that will displace artists? And I think that's a pretty interesting question. So, yeah.
It's funny because and this is like a side note, but I was listening to Heather Cox Richardson. She's the historian. Mm-hmm. And my dad was a history professor. Like, he even taught at the academy for a while. I think you might have taken a class.
Mm-hmm. I took the French Revolution.
That's right.
Yeah.
And so I was raised with this idea of always using an historical framework to understand the present, mm-hmm. and to kind of look at where we're headed in the future. And she was recently saying, hey, everyone's kind of confused about where we've landed. And she made this, she said, I have this idea that it feels to me like America in the 1850s. And then she ran through like where we were expanding. We had the Louisiana Purchase, and states were forming. California became a state. And the argument was always back then, like, should the state be a free state, or should it be a slave state? So that was already going on, 15 years before the Civil War. Mm-hmm. And the other argument was things like, if you were a free state, how could the slave states require you to hunt down and return fugitive slaves? And there would be like penalties if you refused to do it. Yeah.
I was thinking about that, the Fugitive Slave Act. I mean, I actually was thinking about that with respect to these, Tom Homan going on news programs and talking about, people who harbor, undocumented immigrants will be, arrested or whatever. Yeah.
And even there was talk about, if you return if you kill Roe versus Wade and return the right to abortion to the states, and you have this patchwork that people will travel to states where they can get an abortion, and then the anti-abortion states were saying, like, we're going to police the border, we're going to, reach into another state and arrest some doctor, all these weird things. So that's, I think, what she meant by this 1850s, and she described how what emerged from that this mishmash of parties, which at the time there were the what were they called, the know nothings, know nothings, and there was another really big party that was a flash in the pan. There was a party actually at that time that was anti-Irish immigration, and they believed that the Pope was anti-Catholic. They believed that the Pope was trying to take over America by sending Irish Catholics to breed, and it was back in this poisoning the blood of America. Like
another very familiar rhetoric. Yeah.
Yeah. There's tropes that kind of keep coming back over and over again. I looked to an historical moment, like the arrival of the photography in the painting world. Like if you were a painter, all of a sudden it actually caused a lean or a diversion toward abstract work, because a photograph, it was easier to make like a perfect copy of something with a photograph than it was to paint. So it really changed the value of that type of painting, right?
Like the purpose of painting something changed. You painted something to ask a question about that thing, or to explore color in a certain way or something like that, rather than to reproduce an image.
Right. Yeah. And before, there had been, it was those who could reproduce in sort of a photorealistic way something that had been, in a painting. They were, were applauded for that ability, and it became less valuable because photographers could do it with a click, right? And people often said, like, hey, when television comes, it will ruin radio. Well, it just didn't, it didn't ruin radio. It changed radio, and certainly, like when television came. Cinema had to really innovate and make, widescreen and like surround sound, just to kind of get you out of the house and into the theater. So in some ways, those types of disruptive technologies can actually improve the overall, sort of world of that art form or that channel,
or generate something new and unexpected as a reaction to it. Yeah. Yeah.
Now, my experience, I've been using Midjourney and sort of AI and Adobe products for about a year and a half. Do you remember there was this a photographer who took a pic? He used to do the cover of Time magazine, and he did a portrait of Nelson Mandela. And he said, I had a bunch of assistants. We flew down. We had a 4x5 camera. They gave us 15 minutes with him. We took the photo. We went back. I developed it, and I dodged and burned it, and then they've scanned it. And he goes, the next assignment, I was told to make an image of Ted Turner for the cover, but they wanted him to have like TVs embedded in his head with different stations on them, because he was, starting CNN and had this like empire. So the guy said it was the early days of Photoshop, and he went to the Rockport, Maine, like there was like a photo, kind of a school there that you can study, and they had like the latest equipment, like the latest, servers and hard drives and stuff. So he went in and he said, I went into this dark room for 3 weeks, and I was just wanting to pull my hair out. I was waiting, things were rendering, things were crashing, and I finally got it done. But he was like, the experience was nasty. Like it was compared to like taking a photograph of Nelson Mandela in South Africa, as opposed to like working in Photoshop. And so my point was like, and I remember what he said was, because I can do anything, it's like the Brian Eno thing, it becomes sort of overwhelming, and my job is now a reductionist job instead of additive, And so my experience was like I was trying to make some images for a website for a school, and it was just kids walking on a path through the desert, right? And I was trying different prompts and going along, and like 2 hours go by, 3 hours go by, and Huli comes, and she goes, why don't you just grab your camera and get some friends and go into the desert? Because you know exactly what you want. Like you're wasting like 3 hours prompts. And I was like, it's true. Like it's true. It's kind of a black hole of time in a way. because you can kind of, it's never quite right, and you can always like try something else. And so to me right now, I try to avoid it because it's sucking up all my time, you know?
Yeah. I mean, I think you're speaking about it from kind of the artist's perspective.
Yeah, that's true.
And the thing that I'm a little, I guess the thing that I'm sort of afraid of, or that I sort of potentially see happening, is from the other side, right? So that if somebody hired you to take a picture, or they wanted an image of kids walking on a path or whatever you were saying, right? And somebody hired you to do that, that person 3 years from now might not have to hire you, right? So you're out of work because they can get something good enough with a couple prompts, right? And so I think that, you know, when like that article by Ted Chiang in the New Yorker kind of asked the question, will AI create art, or can AI create art, right? And I think that's like, he's speaking also from the artist's perspective. And I think he very correctly kind of identifies, or he sort of attempts to define, you know, what art is. And he talks a lot about how art has a lot to do with intentionality and the process, like the actual work. It's not just the output. It's not just the end output. It's the whole process. You're making decisions along the whole process. And you're putting your heart into something. You are committing to it. You believe in it. You are curious about something. Like AI can't have any of those feelings, right? Like all of that goes into being an artist. But the thing it's the whole other side of that coin that I think I'm worried about, which is that when AI can do a good enough job at writing a TV script, then the bosses won't want writers, even though AI is not going to do as good of a job. I think there's a lot of reason to think that the vast sort of mass audiences won't care that much. And I could easily imagine like garbage kids shows. There's so many on like Netflix that are just like sub-mediocre garbage kids cartoons, right? Like there's no reason why all of that can't be just written by AI and rendered by AI tomorrow, basically, because it's crap anyway. But you know, you project forward a few years and, you know, maybe Game of Thrones could be done by, you know, written by an AI, and it wouldn't be nearly as good as Game of Thrones, but like at some point, if that's what's there, if there's sort of like, there's so much of that out there, and it just becomes a thing that's sort of like, well, that's what there is. And maybe people complain about it at first and they say, you know, TV used to be better and blah, blah, blah. But at some point, that's just what there is. And we kind of go, oh, okay, that's the AI creating stuff future that I'm a little worried about. It's not that artists won't have reasons to create art. There just won't be a market for their art anymore.
Yeah, it's interesting. That brings up a couple of thoughts. One was, I wanted to mention, there's this photographer from UCLA. I think he was a professor there, and John Baldessari. I don't know if you've heard of him. And he working in the 60s and 70s. And I remember this one really funny prank he did for a show. He had a show, you know, at the UCLA Museum. And so what he did was he went to freshman UCLA students who were taking Drawing 101. Like they were like the first class in their art career. And he said, I'm going to pay you. I'm going to tell you what I want you to draw. I'm going to pay you to draw it. And then I'm going to display that as my photograph. Like, you know, and you know what I mean? And so he had like a whole show that was just students drawing, but he was like, I used the student as a camera and I told them what I wanted and then they made it for me. You know, so he's asking that deep question of like, well, where's the tool? Where's the process? Who is the artist? Because he was
they were his tool in that project. Yeah,
exactly. And he was basically saying like, that's a legitimate artistic process. Like I've chosen, if it weren't for me, this show wouldn't exist. Like I went and asked each student and I told them what to do. So like, it's a really interesting exercise in a way. And it points at, in a way, what you're talking about. The second thing I thought about was, remember E.B. Glenn? We had a class together called Well, it was a blue book, and he called it the affectional ordering of experience.
The art is the affectional ordering of
Art.
experience. Yeah, yeah.
What
That
is
was
it?
the
Yeah.
definition of art. Yeah.
And it really, I've never forgotten it. And this idea that like, I carry a body of experience.
Mhm.
I go to express myself and I make an artifact
Mhm.
that can then be seen and experienced by you, by another person.
Mhm.
But you bring your body of experience to interpret that.
Yeah.
So like, I can't interpret it for you, but that's where the magic happens. Like, we're communicating because I share something that's not me anymore. It's like this object, this artifact.
Mhm.
And then you're experiencing it, looking at it, you know, engaging with it as a sculpture. And you have your own reaction, your own response, your own kind of history of things that would make you think of something else, right? And so,
Yeah.
in a way, how would we map that onto an AI art?
So I think that's where AI will remain a tool if it's part of that process at all, because I think you're right. There is a kind of the essence of art is exactly what you're saying. It's this interaction, this interchange between an artist who created something and the people who consume it, who experience it, whatever, right? And the artist who created something is doing that intentional or affectional ordering of their experience, right? And so that interchange between those parties, the artist and the consumer of the art, or the person experiencing art, I think that will always be a thing. I think that, you know, I guess I don't think there are that many people in the world that are on that side of, you know, that appreciate art in that way as an experience. Like, so I think there will always be those people, but it'll always be it is today and will always be kind of a small minority of people that have this sort of joy of experiencing art. And I remember when I was in college, right? And I had, at one point I had engineer roommates, and I experienced this later in life too with professional people. And, you know, I was still doing starving artist stuff at that time. I was studying English literature and I was taking creative writing classes. And, you know, when I would talk to them about this stuff, they would, you know, their perspective on all of that was clearly like, why would you go to school to do a hobby? Like that's a hobby. Like, people paint and they take pictures and they write stuff. That's like, you go to school, you do engineering and you get a job as an engineer. And if you want to do that other stuff, that's a hobby. And there's a lot of people in the world who think that way, right? I remember later I was, you know, in Arizona and I was writing plays and I was working for the Unlikely Theater, and I was totally starving and barely able to pay my bills and super struggling. And I was painting this house up the Pima Highway and outside, I don't even remember. It was a long bike ride. I didn't have a car, so I would put paint cans in my backpack and I would ride like 15 miles to this house to paint it, to make a little extra money on the side. And the owner of the house was like a middle manager at, you know, some big company, and, you know, made a good salary and had a big, like 5-bedroom house out in the boonies. You know, it was just like one of those new housing developments for cookie cutter big houses, right? You know, I was appreciative that he had given me this job, but he would give me a hard time. Like, when are you going to get a real job? Like, he would ask me that question all the time, you know, because I was working in a bookstore and doing theater stuff. And I remember snapping back at him one day, like, oh, you mean like being a middle manager at a big company? That's the real job I should be, you know, that's the trophy. That's the prize, you know? And I was kind of pissed off, but I do think, like, there aren't, you know, he's not a guy who appreciates art, right? Or artists, or the existence of artists. So I think there is an audience, and there is a receptive kind of type of person for that stuff. But I don't think that's the majority.
And don't you think that that's an ancient, so if we roll the clock back 110,000 years, don't you think that the subsistence sort of hunter-gatherer culture, like, as soon as we were able to provide enough game, meat, and roots and vegetables for the tribe, and you had the opportunity to have division of labor, that there were people who went out and they brought back deer and they're like, hey, we're sleeping on the ground and we're hunting the deer and we're bringing it back for the village. And you're just sitting there, painting on the wall of a cave with like resin and, like crushed up rocks. Like, don't you think that was like the earliest tension that you're experiencing between the engineers and the art?
Maybe. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, it could have been that everybody was kind of engaged in all of those things, but you're right. When things became more divided and specialized, and in more agricultural communities where there were still people going out hunting, there's people planting and harvesting, and there's other people that are drawing pictures and probably experienced a lot of resentment. Yeah.
Well, like think of so there's someone in the tribe that makes shoes, like moccasins, like, and it's 50,000 years ago. And one day they just start sewing beads onto the moccasins instead of just making another moccasin. And someone's like, that's a waste of time. Like, you could make 3 moccasins in the time it takes to add all those beads, and the beads just look pretty, but they don't hold a foot, like I can sort of see that practical tension starting like very early on.
That engineer person was that guy back in the day going, come on, you could make 5 more of those. It's the productive, those became capitalists later, the bosses.
I have to tell a joke that my daughter, youngest daughter, is in med school, and she did study computer engineering. She studied computer engineering and biomechanical engineering. Anyway, so she had gone to like engineering, like summer schools and stuff. She was into, so she would tell this joke. She would say, so everyone's sitting in the bar, a whole group of friends waiting for their friend who's an engineer to come. And they're looking at this half full glass of beer, trying to decide whether they see it as half empty or half full. So they're arguing, and then the engineer walks in. They say, what do you think? And she goes, well, that container is twice as big as it needs to be to hold that amount of liquid. And I remember when I was going through like breakups and my divorce and feeling like really emotional, I remember sort of leaning on that kind of observational, like judgment-free engineering mindset to try to pull myself up out of like the downward spiral of my depression, and it worked to some degree, like to just see the world as it is rather than saying it's either half empty or half full. Like just describe the container and the liquid in it. Yeah. Basic,
well, I think that mind body sort of angle on this is, to continue that digression. I mean, I think like therapy has drifted or not. There's this whole mind body school of therapy now, right? That is much sort of bigger and more influential than it was a few years ago. And it's that exact notion, the idea that an emotion that you're feeling is really just a physical sensation. Like and that there are only, a handful of emotions. There's, fear and sadness and anger and joy, right? And maybe 1 or 2 others. And all those other things we refer to as emotions, like guilt or shame or envy or whatever, like all of those are an emotion plus some story in your head about somebody or about yourself or whatever. And so like, shame or embarrassment, like that is that feeling of maybe sadness, maybe fear, maybe anger, but it's attached to a story about, oh, somebody did this to me, or I did this thing. And it's part of, like, if you don't have that, if you separate it from that story, then all the emotion is this feeling in your chest or your throat or your ringing in your ears or whatever. Like, so I don't know if you've ever had a therapist that kind of use that sort of framework, but I think it's super useful. It's basically kind of, you identify, oh, like, what am I feeling? Well, I'm feeling sad. No, but what are you feeling? Well, I'm feeling this heat in my solar plexus, right? Like, that's what I'm actually feeling. Like, I can attach all kinds of stories to that, but what I'm actually feeling is a tightness in my throat. So I think it's kind of similar. It's like very, very, it's very concrete observations about what is actually occurring that you can pick up with your senses.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, we're like these, I heard a therapist describe us as, we're bags of chemicals sloshing back and forth.
Yeah.
And the fact that we have a persistent personality is kind of amazing.
For sure. I mean, I am so fascinated with that question. That's something we should maybe dive into on a future episode. But one last thing I wanted to say about AI is I think when it comes to this question of is it a tool or whatever, and some of these other questions we've kind of explored, I think there might be sort of a different answer for writing versus visual arts, and so, and maybe other media as well, like other formats, other forms. I think, I think that I don't know what the differences are, but I suspect there would be different answers maybe to those questions for different forms.
Yeah, going back to so you mentioned the term like what we'd be afraid of in the future, right? Like, with AI, like as it evolves and develops, and there's this big idea that will be replaced. And this has been going around for a while. I remember back in like the mid 90s, this guy wrote an essay in the Reader that said that, at some point in the future, we all need to agree that everything will be automated that can be.
Yeah.
Right. And that humans are actually like, when we look at the Waymo, like humans, the Waymo or one of these automated cars might crash into someone or do something wrong, but eventually it's going to be better than a human. Because it doesn't need to pee, it doesn't daydream, it doesn't, like the only thing that really can go wrong would be like a crash, like a software crash, or like a battery runs out. But
by the way, a Waymo helped me out today by having a crash. Like when I drive my kids to school, do you have Waymo in Tucson yet?
No. Yeah.
Okay, so when I was they're all over the place here. When I was driving,
they're in Phoenix. They always start in Phoenix.
So there's this one it was raining today, and the traffic's always crazy when it's raining because California people don't know how to deal with rain. So we were trying to pull onto this busy road from a stop sign, and it's kind of a crazy intersection. You have to go through you have to cut through one lane of traffic between cars, and then you're blindly moving into the inside lane where there's cars moving really fast, right? But on that inside lane, a Waymo had malfunctioned and just died. So it was blocking all the traffic. So I just was able to easily merge. So it was, thankfully the Waymo crash actually helped me out this morning. Yeah.
So I remember back, I think I've heard people talk about sort of this automation problem, which is before AI, obviously, but AI is part of automation, right?
It's sort of the next wave. Yeah.
It's the next wave. So I remember, I think one of our biggest problems, like the elephant in the room that's constantly sitting there, is, let's go back to, there's a pile of gravel and people are moving it with shovels and wheelbarrows. Like a group of guys has to move this pile of gravel from one side of the yard to the other. And along comes a steam shovel. And everyone always says, well, the steam shovel can do it faster, and one guy is running it. And that allows the other guys on the team to not waste their time moving the gravel, because they could be building something, like making bricks or piling the bricks into a wall. Like whatever the steam shovel can't do, they can move on to do that, which creates this sense of like increasing GDP, like higher productivity per person, because you have this thing that's been automated. And then the other people can do higher value tasks that they were prevented from doing before because they were doing menial tasks. Right. Yeah.
Or if not higher value, just like, sometimes that's higher value, as you're saying, but other times there are no saddle makers really today. Except it's a very niche industry, right? But there used to be tons of saddle makers, right? And so all those people presumably were put out of work and just moved to something else. It may have been higher value, it may not have been, but it was just some other thing that was created, because cars exist or whatever.
But like this idea that I remember back in the 90s when Bill Clinton was president and we had like a surplus and the economic growth was at like 10% or something, right? And I remember just thinking, like, in order to feel rich, we need that growth line to continue. Like, but this planet can't handle, at some point, where we are today, there will be some kind of breakdown in the system, because that level of growth, especially as it spreads from like first world nations to second and third world nations, is they want to, third world nations want to have air conditioning and full on internet and never not have electricity, right? And so my question is, yes, there's this idea that at some point in the future, we're going to have to figure out how to survive in a society where the means of production can be handled by robots.
Yeah.
And so at that point, can we do it elegantly, transform into that society, or do we need like a revolution? Does there need to be some kind of, Marxist revolution where people grab the means of production from billionaires and sort of put it into some kind of social, democratic socialism? Like, that's my question is.
Yeah. I mean, that's the universal basic income question is exactly that, right? Yeah.
Yeah. And it's sitting there. And I think what's interesting about the universal basic income thing is that's just what do we do for jobs and for income or to support ourselves. But the other question is the growth trajectory that we're on is not sustainable, and it's clearly causing major problems on the planet. Now, I actually believe that we will innovate our way out of the climate crisis. I believe that I know that sounds like overly optimistic possibly, but I think that when the pressure's on now, right?
I mean, what else can you believe, right? Like you kind of have to believe that, right? I mean, the other option is I mean, why even bother believing in that other option?
Right. It's a silly analogy, but I remember a friend of mine was talking about back to this idea of like things replacing things. Like, so there was a time before the combustion engine in the car where one of the biggest problems in New York City was horse poo, like dung, was piling up so high on these like empty lots in the middle of the city, and they couldn't move it out fast enough. And there were so many horses pooing on the ground, and they would scoop it up and put it in these piles. They would like collapse and fall in the street, and no one knew what to do. They literally didn't know what to do. And there was not like a plan to solve that problem. And along came the combustion engine and the car, and it solved it for them. Like they didn't have to figure out how to do it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
To deal with the poo, right? Yeah. But so I think there is another possibility, which we just sit there staring at the problem. I want to fly to Florida this December. I want to, and by the way, flying turns out to be per miles per gallon way better than driving. Mm-hmm. Like if I drove to Florida, it would be phenomenally more.
Yeah, there's one of our old classmates collaborated with a friend to build, like, I forget, I'll send you the link. I'll put it on the show notes. It's basically a website where you can calculate for any trip the carbon difference between driving and flying, and it has variables like how many people are in the car and what kind of car is it, things like that. So it's kind of interesting.
That is cool.
Yeah.
And like once a year we like to go down to Colombia to visit my wife's family, and I often thought, like, what if someday in the future, if we could get on a cruise, like to go on a boat there, like take off from Miami and go to, and actually like work on a laptop, like work. I mean, if it's universal basic income, maybe we don't need to work anymore. But the idea would be like, I wouldn't mind taking a boat and taking 3 weeks to get there if I could take 6 weeks off or 12 weeks off. And then, you know what I mean? Like, it's this idea that we have to get there fast because we don't want to waste time traveling, that I want to take the plane. But it would be kind of nice to have to take a boat.
For the journey to be part of the experience. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, like you could stop in different islands.
I mean, we all sort of have that, like that beautiful truth that the journey, it's not about the destination, it's about the journey, right? One thing I wanted to say that you kind of touched on was just like jobs being replaced. I think one of the things that I'm observed that's, I think, kind of interesting is that I would say 10 years ago, when the discourse about what jobs were most vulnerable to AI, it was like, fast food, truck driving, they were sort of like repetitive, manufacturing, all these things that were sort of like, quote unquote, menial jobs. And when ChatGPT burst onto the scene and the jobs that were obviously vulnerable were like copywriting, if you're writing copy for marketing, if you're the person at your business who writes tweets, for your company, like
contracts.
Yeah. Or contract, like low-level law jobs, low-level creative jobs, right? Like, I don't think anybody saw that coming. And then software development too. Like I would, like all the whole STEM school thing that was, Bill Gates and all these people were like, our kids are falling behind and it was almost like, at least out here in California, there was almost like this sometimes spoken, often unspoken, like, we need to train our kids to be software developers because that's where the money is. So they were talking STEM, but like, at least in California, STEM was almost a synonym for software development. It wasn't like engineering and healthcare and all these other science jobs. It was like coders. We need more coders, right? That's the high paying job of the future. All the parents here now are like, coding is a commodity that AI is going to do 5 years from now. And parents are freaking out. Like, they've sort of like groomed their kids. There's so many parents that have groomed their kids to become, I mean, all these like kid learning apps to help kids learn how to code. And I mean, boot camps and parents, so many parents committed to this idea that their kids, you know, that's the way to make money, is learn how to code. And it's completely shifted to, you know, coding is just a commodity that AI will be able to do. And so what do we do now? Yeah.
What is the new, do you know what are parents aiming for now? Like, what do they think is the
I mean,
next?
I hear a lot of tongue-in-cheek conversations, or semi-tongue-in-cheek, like, you know, like plumbing is, you know, plumbers is where, and electricians, because like everybody who lives in San Francisco can't get a plumber. There's just not nearly enough, or an electrician, and they charge like an arm and a leg because the supply of actual competent tradesmen is really low. So I mean, it's a tongue-in-cheek, but also not really a joking conversation. Like, hey, there's serious money in the trades, and you know, like, it'll be a long time before an AI can go into some old house and rip out copper pipes. You know what I mean?
Right.
Yeah.
One of my fears. Who is that guy? Tristan. He has red hair, and he's like, he worked for Google for a while, and he was
the guy who does the social.
the social net. I think he did that movie, right?
Yeah, it was a documentary about, yeah.
Yeah. So, and I'm going to butcher it, but he has this thing where he says we have these primordial brains with an industrial era mindset with godlike ability.
Godlike power. Yeah, that's Daniel Schmachtenberger, who he has traveled with to some extent. Came up with that. Yeah.
And what's the actual thing? Because I butchered it. What is it?
That's basically it. Yeah.
Yeah. Do we have so my concern is that let's go back to where you said like an AI you could feed all the Game of Thrones into AI and then just say write another season. You know, like make another season.
Yeah.
Make the characters develop in these ways just based on what you saw, like, right? And I think a ChatGPT, some kind of large language model, could easily intake all the heroes' journey stories, all of the TV shows that were most popular. You could rank them and then say lean, you know, toward these ones, and it could write a pretty good story. You know, my fear is actually that, like, when I'm looking at YouTube and I save something to these vast library of folders that I have, like, that I'm interested in, I'm giving the algorithm like a bunch of information about what I like to look at. And I worry that at some point, YouTube could just create a completely made up, artificially created piece of content that would hijack my dopamine. You know, that would,
that's the amusing ourselves. You're coming back to amusing ourselves to death, right? I mean, that's exactly what that is. And also Infinite Jest. Wasn't in that novel, The Infinite Jest, wasn't it the film that was so entertaining that you couldn't remove yourself from it? Like people would starve to death because they couldn't stop watching it or something. I can't remember. I mean, it was so long since
there's a Wim Wenders film, a sci-fi film called Until the End of the World.
Yeah.
And the premise is this engineer's, he's in Australia and his wife is blind. And he goes on this quest to build her a device that would like jack into her brain, and then it would have like a video camera, and then she could see the world, like, you know, and so he tries to build it. But what ends up happening is, and I forget the details, he basically is able to, you put this device on and you're able to, like, your mind is able to create images that it loves so much that you just want to stay there. Like you're addicted to seeing what you're seeing, you know?
Well, that's how we end up with the Matrix, right? Then we're just plugged in.
Yeah.
And we just experience a virtual world that we can't remove ourselves from and don't want to.
So I don't know why, but like as an artist, I've always liked to, and are we allowed to curse on our show?
Yeah.
Because I've always liked to
Yeah.
fuck with stuff. Like I was just sort of, like I was working at a film editing house in the 90s, and we did commercials. Like we did 30-second commercials, like Tylenol, Nike, like, GM, Pepsi. And I was supposed to make copies of the commercials and then like give them or take them to like high level ad agency people, right? You remember meeting me for lunch. And I remember once by accident, I copied the audio from one 30-second clip onto the visuals from another. And what was so weird is that these ad people were using like a template where it was like, kind of like a haiku. Like they had this 30-second thing, and the sound lined up perfectly.
The arc was kind of the same, like the sort of the key the markers or whatever.
But even because this was the first nonlinear editing, so people kind of who came from film, they didn't do a lot of quick cutting. That was like this scene, then this scene, then this scene, right? So it kind of even lined up the audio, like the sound effects lined up, right? So like there was one that was called like double and triple trailer trucks are invaded. It was like a PSA about not having triple trailer trucks on the streets. It was meant to scare you. And then there was a visual about some woman who had like a headache, and she'd be like, double and triple trailer trucks. Like, and there was something like, I brought in one of my friends from the office, and I was like, isn't this so funny? And he goes, I don't show this to anyone because they're going to think you're sick. And I was like, I hate advertising. I'm working making ads, but I think it's hilarious that if you swap the sound, like it makes it a new thing. Like it makes it it's a comedic element, right? Comedic object. We were talking about, with the, so my thing is like, I hear about like the algorithm, the AI, and my temptation is to like really mess with it. Like to think like for instance, one of my friends, runs a yoga studio. She's a manager here, Darren's sister-in-law. And she felt like she was using ChatGPT to respond. She has to write a lot of emails to potential students that want to like ask questions like, does your studio, will I be safe if I have a torn hamstring, or and then she writes back to them. That's a big part of her job. So she started using ChatGPT to write the email for her. Yeah. Like she'd say, I need to respond to this student about safety, and then it would just write the email.
Yeah, support. I mean, that's like customer support. That's a huge use case for.
But wait, so she figured out that the person who had written to her was also using ChatGPT, and that they realized that they were just going back and forth, writing emails back and forth, and they were both just watching it happen. Yeah, I think that's fat. It's like
that's like the dead internet theory, right? Like it's just bots talking to each other. Or even in that article by Ted Chiang, there was that one. He said, there's no doubt that somewhere in the world this is happening, where somebody is using ChatGPT to create a document from a list of bullet points, and then somebody who receives that document uses ChatGPT to turn it back into bullet points in order to consume it. I mean, that's totally happening somewhere.
Wow. And in some ways, I feel like the one thing, if we go back to amusing ourselves to death and the sort of the arc of communication, in some ways, there is a signal that is, we'll call it the humanity signal. And there's a genetic component, like, chromosomes, DNA, like we evolved, and then we're moving forward across time, and we continue to evolve, and the world we've created in collaboration with the planet has continued to evolve and will. But the signal is, it's kind of, like hello world, like we're here until we're not, like, and in some ways, like, I feel like this, like as an artist, like our job is to transmit into the future, like what it's like being here now. Like almost like document what is like a time capsule. Like each piece in some way is like a time capsule of our sort of sloshing chemicals back and forth inside this soggy bag, like, because that's really, to me, the fascinating part is that could arrive, we could arrive at this from stardust, like the intelligence that it took to become us. And I know this, I often say, like, the dinosaurs had zero culpability in their demise, but we very likely will have 100% culpability in our own demise, which is kind of an accomplishment in a way. Like you know, if you sort of game theory out what's the possible, like what could have happened, and this did happen, and you're like, well, you know, I mean, it was like kind of a long shot to get here, and then yeah, we blew it up. But I don't know. I'm just kidding. That was kind of a downer.
That's probably a good place to wrap it. Why don't we? What do you want to end on? You want to do another first world problem?
Yeah. Do you want to go first? I'm trying to think.
Sure. Yeah. So mine is these sort of unnecessary walled gardens. Like, so, you know, like you can't buy a Kindle book on Amazon app on your iPhone because Apple has a competing product, right? But you can just go to the browser on your phone and go to Amazon on your browser on the same device. It's just slightly less convenient. So like Apple's not preventing you. They're just like annoying you, right? Yeah. And then, and the same thing with like, if I ask Alexa to play a song, you know, on my Spotify, it used to do that, or play an artist, play songs by Nico Case or whatever, right? It used to just do it. Now Amazon has put up this barrier where they will play similar songs, or like Nico Case radio or whatever. They won't play the specific track or album or artist that you've asked for. But I can just go on my phone and navigate to Spotify and find that what I wanted to play and send it to my speaker. It's just slightly less convenient. So like, it's not really a walled garden. It's just kind of like, it's like we've just put some poison ivy in the way of the path. Some poison oak here. You can step around it. You probably get a little bit of a rash, but we're not really blocking you. We're just kind of pissing you off a little bit. So that's my first world problem.
That is interesting. Honestly, I actually can't think of one, so I think I'm going to decline. But I guess my first world problem would be the iOS 18. You could like upgrade to 18. Mm-hmm. I guess I had this sort of like hope or ambition that it would be amazing and would change my life and would make using the phone, like it would make like, you know how like we complain about when you're typing, like how the amount of errors in the predictive text like are just, and it was supposed to get smarter like over time, and it just got dumber.
Wow.
And so I feel like when I upgraded to 18, I thought, oh, it's all that's gonna go away, and it didn't.
You had high hopes.
I had high hopes, and I'm just very disappointed in what was this idea that it's going to improve over time, because every single time that I correct it, it should go back into the loop as feedback of like, he doesn't ever want to write that, it's strange.
Yeah. I can't stand Apple's predictive text. I don't like the way it puts proper names into it. It uses them by default all the time.
Yeah.
And so many other problems with it. And so I'm 100% with you, but I don't even know if I'm running iOS 18.
Do you do auto updates?
I do, but is it?
Yeah. I think you had to manually push that one because it was such a big one. And I actually, another aspect to that is I went to back up my phone, and I have a 1 terabyte phone, but my computer's 1 terabyte drive. And you can't back it up to an external drive.
That's a lot of storage on your phone.
It is. I got it because I was going to use it as a B cam for interviews. Okay. So I wanted to, and I could record, log, but that's one of those weird things is it's like, we reached the point where the phone is the same size as the hard drive. There's nowhere near enough room on the laptop to actually back it up, but they won't let you point to an external drive. That's big.
How we think of that as a first world problem, but the idea of putting 1 terabyte on this thing is insane. Like the fact that it fits a terabyte, that's the farthest thing from a first world problem. That is so much.
The truth be told, it's only got like 448 gigabytes.
I guess that's the definition of a first world problem, a problem that's not really a problem.
Right. That's exactly it. Like the fact that I don't have enough room to back up the shit that I have because it's too big. It's like,
you can fit a fucking terabyte on a phone. It's crazy. All right. I think that's a good place to end it.
That's great. All right, man. Have a good rest of your day.
All right, brother.
Talk to you soon.
See you next week.
Satellites?
A satellite represents a journey, information gathering, this journey around the Earth.